So I would challenge you to ask, where in my life am I busily bored? Where in my life do I have the tendency to pull out the phone? And how can I instead replace that with something inspirational? Or how can I just stay in the moment and ask better questions and be observant of my environment? And then, what assumptions should I be challenging? Is another thing that can help us counter busy boredom. Where in my life am I fossilizing around assumptions about the way things have to be? And how can I challenge that assumption? Where am I entrenched? The third deadly sin is comfort. So we have aimlessness, we have boredom, we have comfort. I believe the love of comfort is often the enemy of greatness in our lives. It's easy for us to become entrenched. Now, you might experience comfort on your path to doing great work. Very well might happen, right? You can experience comfort on the path to doing great work, but comfort and brilliant work are mutually exclusive objectives. You cannot pursue comfort and great work simultaneously. At some point, those who do great work are those who choose to do the right thing, even when it's the uncomfortable thing. Okay, so we can't fall prey to comfort. So what does this mean? We have to commit to personal growth and innovation. We have to push ourselves personally to grow, to innovate, which means we have to be in constant skill development mode. So this is a growth curve. And it's indicative of how people actually grow in their skills and their abilities to engage their work. And there are 4 phases that we go through as we grow. The first is discovery phase, when you're first learning something new. The second is imitation phase, which is when we look at somebody else in our environment and we imitate them to develop the skills that we need in order to get to the next place. So think about somebody who's learning how to play guitar, right? They hear Eric Clapton on the radio and they think, I could do that. Right? So what do? They go out and they buy a $3,500 guitar and it sits in the closet for 6 months. That's the first step. But at some point, they actually have to pull it out and they have to start working on it. And that's imitation phase. That's why when you walk by a guitar store, you hear dun, 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 right? These are people who are imitating. They're annoyingly imitating, but they're imitating. It's what they're doing. The third phase is divergence phase. This is when we begin taking those skills, the platform that we developed during imitation phase, and we start sailing perpendicular. We start doing new things, trying new things, experimenting, finding our voice. And then we hit crisis phase. And crisis phase is when we suddenly realize we're no longer getting the same return on our effort that we once did. We're kind of stuck. Even though we're doing the same things, we're kind of stuck. And there are 2 choices we can make during crisis phase. We can either start a new curve, which means going back to the beginning, learning new skills, trying new things, continuing to grow, which, by the way, many people won't do because they don't like the feeling of incompetence once they've achieved a certain level of success in their life. They don't want to look incompetent, so they won't go back and try and learn new skills. So they get stuck. Or you can begin down the backside of the curve because if you're not growing, you're dying, ultimately. So I would challenge you to ask the question, where am I in these stages as a maker? And what is it going to take for me to move on to the next stage? And then what skill do I need to learn? Where am I? And then what do I need to learn in order to move on to the next place? And where in your life are you dedicating time to learn new skills, to sharpen your craft? And not just while you're practicing it, but what are you doing to sharpen your craft? To engage in unnecessary creating so that you can continue to develop your skills. The next deadly sin is delusion. Delusion is when we live with a false sense of who we are, a false sense of what we bring the world. And this is easy for creators to slip into. They want to live by a false narrative. How many of you would admit that you watch the television program known as American Idol? Yeah! Well, my family does too, but we tend to only watch maybe the first 4 or 5 episodes of every season, right? Why do we only watch the first 4 or 5 episodes? That's when the parade of freaks comes across the stage, right? Yeah! That's when you have all these people getting up saying, my name is Joe, I'm from Alexandria, Louisiana. My mama told me I'm the greatest singer since Johnny Cash. I'm going to be singing Carry On My Wayward Son, right? You just know from the beginning it is a disaster in the making. And yet they can't receive feedback when they hear it from the judges because they're living according to a false narrative. You know, they go screaming out, they slam the door, they're cussing out the TV people. Makes for good television, I'm not going to lie. It's good television, right? But it's really bad for those people because they're living according to a false narrative. So what we have to do is we have to be honest with ourselves. Be honest about who we are. There are many reasons why we don't do this, why we live according to false narratives, but it is always, always a losing battle, okay, when we're living according to a false narrative. So the best way I've found to approach your work in a more honest and meaningful way as a maker is to define your ethic. which is choosing a set of words that define how you will engage your work every day, how you will bring yourself to what you do. So for many years, my ethic has been ACHE, artistic, curious, healthy, energizing. Every day, I bring those 4 qualities to everything I do, every client that I work with. That's how I choose to approach my work. All right, so what is that for you? What is the collection of words that you use to approach your work every day, to define your engagement? So what you can do is ask yourself, what am I doing right now that doesn't seem like me? What am I doing right now that seems outside of the bounds for me? Ask this of somebody that you know. If you have a spouse or a close friend, by the way, you may not like what you hear, and that's okay. But what am I doing right now that doesn't seem like me? Or what's something obvious I don't see right now? It's a great question you can ask to keep you moving up the rugged mountain, to prevent you from getting stuck in a place of delusion, living according to a false narrative. The next deadly sin is ego. Aimlessness, boredom, comfort, delusion, ego. This is when we become inflexible because we're putting ourselves ahead of the outcome that we're committed to. Really easy to let this happen, by the way. And I think in our culture, we sometimes tend to celebrate ego. We tend to tell stories of leaders who have led their company to the top of the industry by being this, egotistical person who won't take no for an answer. The problem is, I think we often suffer from a kind of survivorship bias. When we look at, I think we talk about those people, we don't talk about how many people led their company to the bottom of the ocean because they refused to admit they hit an iceberg, right? But that happens more often than we want to admit. There's a dynamic Jim Collins calls hubris born of success, which means because I've always been successful, I will then therefore always be successful. And we have to be careful not to let this creep into our lives and into our work. Now, we tend to think of ego as the bombastic manager charging into the room saying, look at me, kneel before Zod, right? That's what we think of as ego. But sometimes ego can take a more sinister route, especially for makers. Oh, you don't like my idea? Oh, you're not going to listen to my idea? Oh, you're not going to accept my work? Okay, all right, well, I'm going to go hide in the corner. I'm going to take my marbles and go home. Right? Playing the victim is a form of ego because you're putting yourself ahead of the work. And it's really easy to let criticism creep in as a maker. And they say, okay, fine. If you're going to criticize my work, I'm just not going to make anymore. And you're letting other people control your engagement. You're letting other people define your engagement. It's another form of ego. You're becoming inflexible. You're putting yourself ahead of the work. What you have to do as a maker is you have to be confidently adaptable, meaning I am moving headstrong in the direction I believe is right, but I'm also willing to listen to disconfirming information, and I have people in my life who can speak uncomfortable truth to me. Right? Confidence says I can get this right, ego says I can do no wrong. Confidence says I'm valuable, ego says I'm invaluable. These are fundamentally different things, and we have to be careful not to let confidence become inflexible ego as a maker, okay? So where in my life have I become inflexible because of ego? Where am I playing the victim? Where am I withdrawing because I don't like what I'm hearing? Where in your life are you putting yourself ahead of the outcome that you're committed to? The next deadly sin is fear. Fear. Fear is when we don't act, we don't make things, we don't try things because the perceived consequences of failure outweigh the perceived benefits of success. There's a guy named Neil Fiore who often does experiments with procrastination. He'll bring people into a room like this. He'll put a wood plank on the floor about 10 feet long, 6 inches wide, and he'll ask them, could you walk the length of this plank if I ask you to? Say, of course, it's a wood plank on the floor. Why wouldn't I be able to walk that? And I say, great. Now imagine I take that 10-foot long, 6-inch wide wood plank and I suspend it 100 feet in the air between 2 buildings. Now could you walk the length of that plank? And they'll look at the imaginary plank and they'll look at him and say, no way, are you kidding me? No way am I going to walk a wood plank 100 feet in the air. And it seems reasonable, right, on the surface of it, but what's changed about the technical skill required to walk the wood plank? Absolutely nothing. If you can do it on the ground, you can do it in the air. What's changed are the perceived consequences of failure, which in this case is plummeting to your death, so I kind of get it, right? But I would submit to you that many of us go through our days artificially escalating planks. As makers, we artificially escalate planks, artificially escalate the perceived consequences of failure to the point that we don't act. We don't try things. We don't experiment. We don't take small strategic risks on a daily basis. You see, fear turns something innocuous into something terrifying. That's what fear does. But once we begin to talk about fear, once we have people in our life who can help us notice the places we're afraid to go, it tends to turn fear into something more innocuous. It tends to dispel the fear. We have to talk about true risk versus perceived risk, especially within organizations. So as a maker, where are you afraid to go? My friend Steve Pressfield calls this resistance. Resistance is often the very place that we need to go. Resistance is the thing that stands between us and the thing that we know we need to make. My friend Brian says fear is often the smell of opportunity. And I believe that's true. Sometimes the place we are most afraid to go is the very place we need to move headstrong into. So how do we do that? To do that, we have to find our voice. To find our voice as a maker, as a creative. Which means we have to notice those places that we're afraid and we have to act squarely in that direction. Now, by the way, sometimes this means taking small strategic risks. You know, my friend Thad Cockrell also says we have to walk into dark rooms and turn the light on. That's what we're supposed to do as creatives. Every day we walk into a room, we turn a dark room, we turn the light on. That's our job. Now, there might be a man-eating lion in there. We don't know, right? But our job is just to walk into the room and turn the light on. But the very act of doing that is the act of finding your voice, which means to follow the arrows. So I'm going to give you a couple of points of traction to help you begin to think about the kind of stuff you want to make, the kind of action you want to take to confront your fear. What angers you? What angers you? Now, I'm not talking about road rage, by the way. I'm talking about compassionate anger, compassion, to suffer with. What fills you with compassionate anger? Oh, somebody needs to do something about that. What is that for you? What fills you with compassionate anger? What makes you cry? Or guys, what makes you feel like you have something in your eye, right? How many of you have seen the movie Rudy? Yeah, I am profoundly moved by the story of underdogs, right? I've seen that movie like 100 times. I'll be in the basement watching. I was in the basement recently watching it, and I had lots of stuff in my eye, My wife came downstairs and she said, "What are you doing? Why are you crying? You've seen this movie 100 times." I'm like, "I know, but he's so small and he's playing so well and they're going to carry him off the field. It's beautiful," right? I am profoundly moved by the stories of underdogs. I am. Guess what? I get to spend most of my time working with teams and people and companies who would be considered underdogs, trying to help them create and be better at what they do. That fuels my work. It helps me find my voice, helps me define who it is I'm making for. What is that for you? What makes you cry? What moves you emotionally? What have you mastered? What are you already good at? I love when Jim said, "We make good stuff." That's who we are. That's who our community is. What is that for you? What have you already mastered? What are you already good at? People think innovation is something new, something that's never been thought of. Often innovation is the thing that we know that we are already good at, that people come to us. It's obvious to us, but not obvious to everybody. And then what gives you hope? What fills you with hope? What gives you irrational hope? Cats and dogs living together, fire and brimstone falling from the sky, but you think it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine, right? What is that for you? What is that irrational hope that you have? Great clue to finding your voice. So, I would challenge you to ask on a daily basis, where am I paralyzed by a fear of ... And how can I apply action, small strategic risk in the direction of that fear? The final deadly sin is guardedness. It's when we become closed off to other people. It's when we stop engaging with other people. And the more successful we become, the more easy it is for us to become isolated as a maker, as a creative. So we have to stay connected to other people, which sounds obvious on the surface. It really does. But it takes effort, it takes work, it takes diligence to build effective collaborative relationships. I love how one of my favorite thinkers, Kierkegaard, talked about this dynamic. He said, "By forming a party, by melting into some group, we avoid not only conscience, but martyrdom. This is why fear of others dominates this world. No one dares to be a genuine self. Everyone is hiding in some kind of togetherness." And as we become more successful, it's easier to find echo chambers to hang out in. And it's hard to find truth. It's hard to find people who will speak truth to us. So we have to come out of hiding. We have to put our guns on the table. Meaning we have to be willing to let people speak truth to us. I was speaking in Texas a couple of weeks ago. I said, literally, some of you, please put your guns on the table when people speak, But we have to be willing to let people speak truth to us. Sometimes when we get feedback, what's the first thing that happens? We get defensive. If we want to get better at what we do, at what we make, we have to be willing to put our guns on the table. This is especially true if you lead an organization, by the way. You can't be defensive. We need mirrors to tell us what they see. And we need circles of people to keep us inspired. So who fills your well? Who do you get with on a regular basis to talk about the work that you're doing, talk about what's inspiring you? We need these kind of people. We need community makers. We do. Okay, just a couple minutes we have remaining together. Why is this important? I mean, really, we're doing fine. We're making stuff. We make good stuff. Why? Why is this important, right? We know what we're doing. We're good. I would submit to you this is about more than just, kind of from a 50,000-foot level, it's about more than just squeaking out a little bit more work, creating a little bit more value. We talked about that body of work that you're building, the change that you're creating. It's about more than that. All of this meshing stuff, this kind of softer, more fluffy side of what we do, it's about more than that. Ultimately, it's about you finding your sweet spot. It's about you working your way into a place where you're operating with full capacity in a way that only you are capable of doing. Each of us has an arena of influence, an area that is our sweet spot, the place where we can have more impact than anybody else could have in that area because of our unique combination of passions, of skills, and of experiences. But you don't work your way into that sweet spot by accident. You work your way into that sweet spot by design, by purpose, through daily discipline, by staying aligned, by asking questions that keep you in a place of contribution, by preventing aimlessness, boredom, comfort, delusion, ego, fear, and guardedness from robbing you of that contribution. I love how another one of my favorite thinkers talked about this dynamic of bringing the uniqueness of who you are to what you do. Thomas Merton said this: there can be an intense egoism in following everyone else. People are in a hurry to magnify themselves by imitating what is popular and too lazy to think of anything better. Hurry ruins saints as well as artists. They want quick success, and they're in such a hurry to get it, they cannot take time to be true to themselves. And when the madness is upon them, they argue that their very haste is a species of integrity. They want quick success, and they're in such a hurry to get it, they cannot take time to be true to themselves. And when the madness is upon them, when the marketplace is screaming at them, when the pressure is building, they justify it as a species of integrity. And they compromise their contribution, they compromise themselves, they compromise their body of work, and ultimately, they point at that body of work and say, that does not represent me. That's not who I am. That represents everybody else's priorities. So have the courage to bring yourself to what you do today, to make things that you are passionate about according to your productive passion. Okay, have the courage to do that. So one final thought for you. About a decade ago, a friend of mine was leading a meeting, and I asked kind of an out-of-the-blue question. It was a really weird question in the context. We were looking at spreadsheets. I said, what do you think is the most valuable land in the world? I'm like, that's a weird question. I don't know. Most valuable land in the world? He said, well, just go with me. I said, is it on page 10 of the spreadsheet? I don't know. Oil fields of the Middle East, wrong. Manhattan, wrong. Gold mines of South Africa, my friend was from South Africa. Gold mines of South Africa, wrong. So finally, after several more guesses, he said, well, I'll tell you what I think the most valuable land in the world is. Great. He said, I believe the most valuable land in the world is the graveyard. Graveyard. He said, yeah, because in the graveyard are buried all of the unwritten novels, all of the unexecuted ideas, all of the unlaunched businesses, all of the unreconciled relationships, all of the things that people carried around in them, all the value they had that they carried from day to day to day to day. And they said, I'll get around to that tomorrow. Tomorrow's the day I'll do that. Tomorrow is the day I'll start moving on that idea I have. And they pushed it, and they pushed it, and they pushed it into the future until one day they reached the bookend of their life, and all of that value was buried with them dead in the ground, never to be seen by human eyes. That's why it's the most valuable land in the world. All of that value, the unexecuted value, was buried with them in the ground. You know, the death rate is hovering right around 100%. And so that day I went back to my office, and I wrote 2 words on an index card. I put them on the wall of my office. I put them in my notebook, and they've been the defining ethic of my life for the last decade, and those 2 words are die empty. Because I want to know when I reach the bookend of my life, I'm not taking my best work to the grave with me. I'm doing everything I can on a daily basis to structure my life with purpose, to make sure that I'm not allowing aimlessness, boredom, comfort, delusion, ego, fear, guardedness to rob me of my most important work. I'm not settling medias ocris. And when I lay my head down for the last time, I can point to a delta, a body of work, and I can say, yes, that represents me. I didn't get everything done. None of us get to do that. But I have no regrets about where I put my focus, my assets, my time, and my energy. So friends, be purposeful, make things, be brave, be bold, stand against the tide. Right? Be you, make things that only you can make. Find your voice, confront your fear, step into resistance. Every single day, walk into a room and turn the light on. And if you do, then someday in the far distant future, when you lay your head down for the last time, you can point to a body of work and you can say, yes, that represents me. And you can die empty of regret, but full of satisfaction for a life well lived. I think that's all any of us can ask for. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.